Board of Regents. And President Kaler, I think you and I begin with some recognition of incoming and exiting officers. Very good.
I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Chris Kramer as our new Vice President for Research. Chris, would you come join me at the podium? Join us at the podium. Chris started his appointment on November 12th of this year and will complete a 2-year term appointment as Vice President. This will provide stability through the presidential transition. Chris has an AB from Washington University in St. Louis and his PhD from the University of Illinois. His professional career began with 4 years of service as an officer in the U.S. Army, including combat duty in Operation Desert Storm. He joined the University of Minnesota in 1982 and is now a distinguished McKnight University professor in the Department of Chemistry. He has been the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and most recently was the Associate Dean for Research and Planning in the College of Science and Engineering. Chris has a strong record of external funding with approximately $14 million in grant support over the past 26 years. As you know, the role of Vice President for Research is a critical leadership position in the university. The Office of the Vice President for Research oversees the university's $900 million research enterprise across all 5 campuses. The Vice President for Research also oversees sponsored projects, research compliance and regulatory offices, and key units dedicated to economic development and technology commercialization. I look forward very much to working with Chris. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, President Kaler. So I was privileged to begin my faculty career at the university in 1992, and the resources that were put at my disposal, the support I received from colleagues and administrators, permitted me to flourish as a teacher, as a researcher, as a scholar. I'm also privileged to be supported by a spouse who's at the university, Professor Laura Gagliardi, distinguished McKnight Professor of Chemistry over there. I've often heard it said the best management strategy is to surround yourself with people who are better than you are, and I figured that would probably be a good approach to marriage as well, so I went with it. Thank you, Laura. My most recent privilege is to be the parent of a child who is attending the University of Minnesota. Alas, my daughter decided that her biology final took precedence over being here this morning, which I can only respect as a professor. But I hope that I'll be a better administrator because I have this experience as well, tuition and all. So thank you, Allison. And so humbled by the confidence in me that the President's expressed with my appointment and mindful of the high expectations that so many across the institution justifiably hold, I intend to do everything I can to pay back the university for its investment in me. Happily, I've already discovered I'm again privileged in that I am blessed with fabulously talented staff, and indeed an operation as a whole that has some of the most hardworking and dedicated individuals at the university. Thus, I'm confident that going forward, the Office of the Vice President for Research can be a strong partner in advancing the research mission of the university and the teaching mission of the university, because research is the fundamental component of our teaching that makes the University of Minnesota unique in the state. And our public engagement mission, because we do research for the public good and often with public partners. So I'm thankful for all that the university has given me. I eagerly look forward to the future.
And as we welcome Chris Kramer to his new position, I also want to extend my profound thanks to Dr. Alan S. Levine for his service as Vice President for Research. Al has held several academic leadership positions at the university. That's an understatement. He's a highly regarded and productive researcher and faculty member in the Department of Food Science and Nutrition. He was the Associate Director of Research and a senior career scientist at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center for 26 years. And he was president of the Obesity Society, amongst other honors. He was chair of his department from 2004 to 6, and he was dean of CFANS from 2006 to 2013. And he was vice president for faculty and academic affairs vice provost for faculty and academic affairs from 2014 to 16, and most recently, vice president for research from January of 17 to November of 2018. But perhaps more than all of those accolades, Al is known for his warmth, generosity, and a really good sense of humor. He's a Renaissance man, and you should ask him later today about his early years as a jazz musician in various venues. He's a beloved figure on campus and one of my favorite people. Al, thank you for your incredible service to the university, and we wish you the best as you return to the faculty to focus on your research. And I'll now ask Chair McMillan to present to you the certificate of recognition. Come on up.
I will read what the certificate has in it before presenting it to Dr. Levine. The Regents of the University of Minnesota recognize with sincere appreciation the exceptional dedication and contributions of Alan S. Levine, Vice President for Research. An accomplished researcher and administrator, Levine served as the Vice President for Research at the University of Minnesota from January 2017 through November 2018. Previously, Levine was Vice Provost for Faculty and Academic Affairs from 2014 through 2016 and Dean of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resources Sciences from 2006 through 2013. Levine is known for his collaborative, generous, and effective leadership style. As Vice President for Research, he organized and catalyzed the university-wide opioid addiction task force and developed the research and discovery objectives of the system-wide strategic priorities. As Dean, Levine successfully aligned and merged two colleges into one cohesive college that addresses the twin challenges of nourishing people and preserving, protecting, and sustainably stewarding natural resources. Together with faculty and departments, he developed new interdisciplinary curricula in environmental science, policy, and management, and food systems. On behalf of a grateful university community, the Regents extend their respect and deepest gratitude to Alan S. Levine for his outstanding service to the University of Minnesota, presented this 14th day of December 2018. Dr. Levine, we are grateful.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a pleasure serving in the role of Renton Administrator. And as I told the Regents, I was trying out all the positions to see which one I liked the best. I learned early when I came here in 1970 and changed majors about 14 times before I got my PhD that it's a good thing to try out different parts of the university and see how you enjoy them. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm thrilled that Chris Kramer is taking over after I left the position. And I will tell you, Chris, in the last month, I wrote a manuscript that would have taken me 2 years to do that. So thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it.
He says you probably don't know what a good spot is.
Nothing yet.
All right. Our first order of business today is approval of, our second order of business, approval of minutes. And I'd entertain a motion and a second and approving the minutes in your materials.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Very good. That brings us to President Kaler's report.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Last month, of course, the Board of Regents did not convene, but I understand you were a little bit busy. Last month was also Thanksgiving, which provides us with an opportunity to pause and reflect on all that we are thankful for. And with that in mind, I'd like to share some things that I am grateful for having. First, I'm thankful for the talent and promise of our students, faculty, and staff. I'm thankful that as the seasons change, our research keeps up the pace. And here I'll preview some of the data that will be released in the university's annual research report next week. In FY 2018, we achieved a record 230 new intellectual property licenses and established 13 startup companies. We also signed a record 86 research agreements under MIN IP, an innovative program, as you know, to expedite partnerships with industry. And in total, we hold more than 900 patents and 1,800 current licenses at the university. You researchers competed for and won a record $793 million in FY 2018, and our economic impact is phenomenal. A $1.2 billion annual impact from our research and $407 million in revenue generated by University of Minnesota inventions over the past 9 years. I'm thankful especially for the board's approval of the new mHealth Fairview partnership this fall. A culmination of years of work, I believe this will prove to be a significant turning point in the history of the university overall and certainly for our medical enterprise. This agreement will, in its first year, provide an additional $68 million of support to the university. This new revenue is more in magnitude than the annual increases requested from the state of Minnesota, and it establishes Fairview Health Services as the second largest financial contributor to the university. Our revitalized partnership with Fairview is a key component of this board's top goal of improving our medical school and returning it to national prominence. I am thankful for the robust financial health of our university as demonstrated in the 2018 annual financial report. And I'm grateful for the robust culture of financial compliance at our university as demonstrated by Deloitte's clean 2018 audit reports and the soon-to-be-released audit report from the National Science Foundation that shows a truly remarkable culture and process of compliance. I'm thankful for the undergraduate and graduate recipients of the Scholarly Excellence in Equity and Diversity, or the SEED Awards, many of whom I had the privilege of speaking with last month at the OED Diversity Breakfast. And I'm thankful for the Minnesota Students Association work on the Listen campaign for mental health. And I'm thankful for the leadership of university faculty, staff, and students in the President's initiative to end sexual misconduct. Last week, I attended one of the university's workshops on sexual misconduct prevention designed for academic leaders, and it was exceptional. And to date, more than 300 deans, department heads, and chairs have attended workshops aimed at helping them feel equipped to carry out their responsibilities related to sexual misconduct prevention. It's exciting to watch the efforts of the President's initiative to prevent sexual misconduct evolve towards real and lasting culture change. Thank you all for those involved in this initiative. I'm thankful for the generosity of the 218,000 individuals who have donated over $3.1 billion to the university's Driven campaign. I'm thankful for the university's visionaries, both living and deceased. I'm thankful for Dr. Josie Johnson, a civil rights visionary whose bravery and generosity of spirit reverberate across generations. And I'm thankful that I was at Humphrey School's commemoration of Josie A. Johnson Community Room earlier this fall. In memoriam, I'm thankful for Earl Docket, who passed away in late October. His contributions to medicine and health continue to save and transform so many lives, and his vision lives on in the work of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. I'm thankful for Jim Swinson, who also passed away in October. Jim and Sue's outstanding contributions to the University of Minnesota Duluth have enabled so many students to get an outstanding education and provided world-class science and engineering facilities in which to learn and grow. I'm thankful for our alumni and supporters all over the world. You'll see in a minute a picture of me with alumni on the stage in Shenzhen, China. Over Thanksgiving, I was in Shenzhen with 250 alumni of U.S. universities, and I'm proud to report that not only did the University of Minnesota have the most alumni present, but I'm pretty sure we had a real Minnesota turkey for dinner. I'm thankful to the senior leaders across the entire University of Minnesota. I'm thankful for my staff and UMF colleagues, including those who shepherded Karen and me through a grueling 12-day trip to China last month and were away from their families for the holidays. I'm thankful for the Gopher football team, headed to the Quick Lane Bowl, and for the Axe. I'm thankful for all of the people who work day in and day out to provide our students with a remarkable and life-changing university experience. I'm thankful for Presidential Finalist Joan Gable, who I think has made clear over the course of this week that she thinks the university is pretty special too. And in closing, I want to thank all of you, the Regents of the University of Minnesota and previous Regents with whom I worked over the past 7.5 years. We have achieved a lot. And I'm excited to continue our momentum over the final 6 months of my presidency on many important issues. The seasons change, but my immense gratitude for our great university is constant. Thank you for the remarkable privilege of leading it, and I look forward to achieving even more together. With that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my report.
Thank you, President Kaler, and please know in the spirit and following up on that wonderful recitations of things for which you are thankful. This university and this board are deeply thankful for your past, current, and ongoing leadership. We're blessed. I typically use this time to connect our agenda items back to the board priorities that we established in July. And at the top of that list of priorities is plan and execute a thoughtful and inclusive transition of presidential leadership. And today we reach a pivotal moment in our search for this university's 17th president. We'll take an opportunity to interview our finalist, Joan Gable, later today. And because I want to maximize the time we have for that, I won't go through the remaining elements of our priority list, but instead move forward and make sure we leave time for that interview. I do want to, before I move on to the rest of our business here, I want to acknowledge that we won't have a key member of our leadership team with us for our next two meetings. Our Provost, Karen Hanson, is going to take a short leave, and we will miss you during that time, but we wish you all the revitalization and recharging that you can capture, and know your services are deeply appreciated as well, Provost Hanson. And we'll look forward to seeing you again when May comes around. I think that'll be our next meeting. After that, we'll see you. So that concludes my report, and I would now move on to item 6 on the agenda, receiving and filing reports. We have the quarterly report of grant and contract activity and our annual financial report. Please, Regents, note, and those are received and filed along with our docket materials. Which takes me to item 7, the consent report. We have a gift report and a report of the All University Honors Committee, and if there's pleasure on the board, I'd entertain a motion and a second to approve the consent report.
So move. Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Very good. That brings us to an important annual point here where we look at and get an opportunity to review the university's performance and accountability report. This is our 2018 report, and we typically have a presentation and discussion, but given time constraints today, we're not going to spend a tremendous amount of time there. The report will, however, come back for our approval in February, and I'd urge Regents to spend time with that, and President Kaler and his team are obviously available through board staff to visit with you about anything that you find in the report. I'd also like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that I asked 3 members of this board, Regents Beeson, Shu, and Powell, to review and explore possible updates to the university progress card. That was quite some time ago that I asked that, and I asked Regent Beeson to lead that. It's an informal group. And I think it makes good sense as we look at the accountability report here to begin under Regent Beeson's leadership to meet with the administration and begin to think about what those maroon and gold measures in our progress card ultimately might look like, and capture as much of President Kaler's input into what works well and what might be ready for renewal and revision in the months ahead. So I just note that for the audience and the board's attention, and Regent Beeson, Regent Hsu, and Regent Powell have all assured me they're ready to tackle that and bring anything back to us that they think warrants our consideration and action. So now I'm going to move to the reports of the various committees from our full day of business yesterday, and I'd begin with Regent Abdul Omari and a report from the Mission Fulfillment Committee.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. We had 2 action items in mission fulfillment. The first one, the committee voted unanimously to recommend adoption of the proposed amendments to Board of Regents policy research involving human subjects. I move adoption of the proposed amendments. Second.
All right, we'll continue our practice of seconding committee motions. We don't necessarily need to do that, but eventually we'll figure out what. That's an abundance of caution, belt and suspenders to do it that way, but we don't need it. But it's been moved by the committee, seconded by a member of the board today. All discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Regent Omari.
One more, Chair McMillan. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the consent report, which includes academic program additions, changes, and discontinuations, and conferral of tenure for outside hires. I move approval of the consent report.
All right, the board is adapting here. Wow.
Thought it would have taken a lot.
Unless council or Mr. Steves tell me we can't do it that way, I'm going to call for a vote without waiting for a second, because I think that's the right way to do it. But all right, any discussion on the motion from the committee before the board? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Any information items for us today, Regent Omari?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, that takes us to audit and compliance and Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. The Audit and Compliance Committee had no action items this month, but we had 3 discussion items. The committee, first, we received the audit results for the fiscal year 2018 annual financial statements from Deloitte, our independent auditor. I'm pleased to report that they had no findings and the university was issued a clean audit, as President Kaler mentioned in his remarks. Then we had a discussion about calculating the cost of compliance, something the committee had been very interested in. Our Chief Compliance Officer, Boyd Coomer, provided an overview of a study conducted by Vanderbilt University about the cost of regulatory compliance in higher education. We discussed the idea of replicating the study specific to the university, but need more information about what such a study might entail before we make a decision. I anticipate we will continue this conversation. And then lastly, as I referenced earlier today, Mr. Coomer then provided the committee with an update on the work that has been going on since 2016 to develop and implement a formal ethics program at the university. It is best practice to have a formal ethics program. This new program will be housed in the Office of Institutional Compliance. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. The Litigation Review Committee is next. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Litigation Review Committee met yesterday. At the meeting, we adopted a resolution that authorized the closing of the meeting to discuss matters subject to attorney-client privilege. That concludes my report.
Very good. And Regent Anderson, I don't believe your report will be quite that quick.
No, thank you. Thank you, Regent McMillan. The Finance and Operations Committee, we acted on 4 items this month, but I'm going to ask you for 5 approvals because we divided 1 item into 2 items. So to start here, the committee voted to recommend approval of a resolution related to fiscal year 2020 Twin Cities undergraduate non-resident non-reciprocity tuition rate. I move approval of this resolution.
Right, that resolution is before the board on recommendation of the Finance and Operations Committee. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Thank you. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the resolution related to the adoption of amendments to the Regents of the University of Minnesota traffic regulation ordinances, which will establish a public hearing date. I move approval of the resolution. Resolution
from the Finance and Operations Committees before the board on traffic ordinances. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Very good. Continue, Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with AFSCME Local 3260, a healthcare unit. I move approval of this resolution.
Discussion on this resolution with the AFSCME contract from the committee. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Very good. Regent Anderson.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, the committee separated one item from the revised consent report. I will move the rest of the consent report first and then the additional item. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the consent report, which includes a central reserves general contingency, purchase of goods and services of $1 million and over, off-cycle tuition approval, capital budget amendments for 3 projects, a resolution related to the issuance of debt, a resolution related to the financing of debt, and a schematic design for 1 project. I move approval of this revised consent report.
Consent report from Finance and Operations is before the board and move for approval. Discussion on any elements of that or that motion. Seeing none or hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. And the committee, finally, we voted to recommend approval of the 3rd amendment to the employment agreement for our head football coach, Twin Cities campus. I move approval of the amended employment agreement.
Discussion on that motion from the committee. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Very good. That motion carries as well. Regent Anderson, any discussion or information items?
Chair McMillan, that concludes my report.
Very good. All right, that brings us to our final committee meeting from this morning. Regent Rocha, the Governance and Policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Governance and Policy Committee did not consider any action items this month. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
All right. That brings us then to old business. I know of no old business items. Does anyone on the board have any new business? Any new business items to come before the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Regent Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, as President Kaler was making his remarks, it occurs to me that a former regent passed this week, the Honorable Bob Berglund from the 7th Congressional District. Mr. Berglund served not only as regent, but the United States Secretary of Agriculture. And I think simply a moment of silence to recognize his service and his passing. I believe Mr. Berglund was 90 years of age. Had the opportunity, in my other capacity, along with Regent Swigum, to vote for Mr. Berglund as a regent. So with your approval, I think just a moment of silence to recognize the Honorable Robert Berglund.
Thank you, Regent Johnson, for that appropriate recognition, and we will take a moment. Thank you to remember a life of service and service to this institution by Mr. Berglund. So that brings us then to what I believe is an appropriate time for a short break. So we will take a recess here, and let's try to keep that at about 3 minutes and refill coffee, and we'll get ready for the next segment of our discussion, which is an interview of our presidential finalists. So we'll reconvene here in short order. Back. I don't need to gavel us in. We didn't gavel out, so the recess is over for this meeting of the University of Minnesota's Board of Regents, and we'll now move to our final item of business today, an interview with Joan T.A. Gable, our finalist for president of this university. Before we move to the interview, I'll remind everyone briefly on the process that has led us to this point today. After President Kaler announced that he would step down as president, we moved to establish a search process that was inclusive of the university community, broadly inclusive. We sought nominations for the search advisory committee and assembled a strong and stellar team of 23 individuals to assist us in this effort. I want to stop and thank Regional Mari for his leadership of the committee, the participation by two of our members of this board on the committee, and very importantly, the participation and active engagement by the other 20 members of the committee, many of whom I recognize in the audience today. So we are grateful. The university is grateful for your service, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize that with a round of applause. Using the core leadership criteria established by this board and input gathered from every corner of the university community, the advisory committee finalized a 26-page position profile and worked closely with AGB Search to recruit candidates for the position. The committee received 67 applications for the position that they narrowed down to 3 lead candidates. Just over a week ago, we sat in this room and voted to name Joan Gable as a finalist, and she has been busy this week crisscrossing the state, visiting all 5 of our campuses and other locations to engage with students, faculty, staff, and community members. Now it's my pleasure to invite Provost Gable forward, but first, a brief introduction. Joan Gable currently serves as Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost at the University of South Carolina, a position she's held since 2015. She was previously the Dean of the University of Missouri's Trulasque College of Business, and prior to that she held faculty and administrative positions at Florida State University and at Georgia State University. Provost Gable earned her bachelor's degree in philosophy from Haverford College in Pennsylvania and her Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Georgia. Welcome, Provost Gable. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
After what I know has been an extraordinarily busy week, and we've got a lot of topics we'd like to address with you this morning. But before we start tackling those, and I ask the Regents to engage you in questioning, we'd love it if you'd get us going with an opening perspective on what you've seen, heard, learned, and what this looks like to you looking forward. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, and good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chairman McMillan.
We are Students for a Democratic Society, and we are here to introduce our demands to both the Board of Regents, but most importantly to the possible incoming president about increasing diversity at the University of Minnesota, as well as disarming the campus police force.
Thanks. You. Provost Gable, I'd welcome you to resume.
Thank you. So, of course, I want to begin with an expression of appreciation to this Board of Regents, to the search committee, to everyone who participated in a listening session, of course, to each and every campus who gave me such an incredibly warm welcome everywhere we stopped along the way, and all of the different people who have to work so hard to make an entire search process like this happen, in particular, what has happened over the last week. I have had the most wonderful experience crisscrossing the state, visiting every one of our campuses, meeting our campus leadership, students, faculty, and staff, who none of you will be surprised to hear are the most amazing ambassadors for the University of Minnesota and the state of Minnesota. It has been an absolute pleasure to have the experience that I've had. What I've seen is incredible passion and commitment for the mission, for our students, for our research, for our community engagement, for our service in major metropolitan areas and in greater Minnesota. And what I've seen is quality of students, faculty, and staff to that mission and to seeing that mission continue into the future. So there's great reason for optimism that I saw before I ever even put my hat in the ring for this position. And every suspicion that I had that things were pretty good around here is completely confirmed. But I also appreciate that there are challenges to higher education in general, and there are challenges here. There are challenges about what it means to be publicly funded and what that means for us in terms of the fiscal stewardship of the university system. There are new expectations for what it means to make intellectual contributions, for how we serve our students in the classroom, for what it means to be beyond the classroom, and what it means to be community engaged. And that is a difficult set of uncertainty for all of us in higher education and here at the University of Minnesota to navigate. But when you look at the higher education landscape nationally and internationally, there is a tremendous amount of opportunity and good news here that further confirms the optimism that I described earlier. Some examples, the legacy of the land-grant mission and what that has meant here over the course of literally centuries, but also very well balanced with an appetite for innovation in the curriculum on every campus in different ways, and then for the system as a whole. There is a systemness that is collaborative and really seeks to fulfill the mission in unique ways in each location, but also as a collaborative that is an incredible asset in the mission for how this university serves the state of Minnesota while also having a global impact. And the quality. I had the pleasure of listening to President Kaler's expression of appreciation earlier this morning, and I couldn't have made a better list of things to be thankful for in his leadership and for the university as a whole in terms of world-class research, world-class instruction, alumni engagement, community engagement, and the fun of the front porch of athletics. So the position is really strong. It's incredibly attractive for someone like me who has made their career in higher education and is compelled to work in a mission-driven environment. And it really gives me a continued deepening of my optimism with what this university can do. For me and in my own journey, I've been in moments of transition in higher education. There have been different forks in the road, and I think there are attributes of my experience and perspective that could serve this university well. There are many things about my work that are traditional in terms of higher education. I was a tenure track faculty member. I wrote a few papers, a few journals, published them. I got a few promotions. I went into administration, and I do the work today that is very typical of a provost, regardless of the university in which they are affiliated. I try to inspire research in the faculty that I work with. I try to create academic programs that serve students well so that they can pursue a life well lived. I look for new programs and new opportunities for our faculty, staff, and students. I work in the community. I work with our legislature, and every now and then I try to raise a little financial support for the university at which I am employed. But there are things about me that are a little bit non-traditional that I think also serve where this university is going and has the opportunity to go. My work has been in applied fields, although I have a full appreciation and respect for the most theoretical work that our colleagues do. The work that I have done in both law and business has put me in the company of our corporate partners from the earliest days of my work, so I have a real appreciation for what is able to happen as a result of those kinds of partnerships. And it's also put me in a position to be steward of revenue developing programs probably a little earlier than some of my colleagues at other institutions, and put me in very close collaboration with our athletic department, probably a little more than your average provost has. And I think that basket of experiences and perspectives aligns well with what I've observed in my preparation for being before you today, particularly in what I've seen in the last week, having the opportunity to go around the state. So I'm incredibly honored and humbled to be before you today. I really look forward to your questions and to continuing the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Provost Gable. And we have a range of topics that we want to tackle with you, and I'm going to pass on my opportunity to be the first questioner and begin by looking to my colleagues and seeing where this goes. We didn't try to organize it in parts or pieces, but I think you'll find us collectively tackling the range of breadth and depth and scope and scale of this university. So very good. I'd start with Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to campus, Provost Gable. I want to ask you a question about academic medicine, and the question do you understand the challenge and the opportunity associated with refocusing our medical school to undertake research at the quality and the quantity that is in front of us? So in addition to what they're doing on the clinical side and the Fairview relationship, I want to understand how your experience in South Carolina has informed you. You've had academic medical in a partnership arrangement. How that's going to inform you as you begin to look at this situation we have here. Because in my mind, if we can do what we could implement the vision, we have the capability of elevating our university up one or two or more slots nationally in research activity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Provost Gable.
Yes, so the University of South Carolina has 2 academic health centers, one at the campus in Columbia, South Carolina, and one in Greenville, South Carolina, which is about 90 miles away. The 2 medical schools at each of those academic health centers have deans. Both of those deans report to me. And for each of the primary hospital partners, both of which are private hospitals, the university does not itself have its own hospital, I sit on different types of governing boards. So for the hospital partner in Columbia, I am on the practice plans governing board. And for the hospital partner in Greenville, I am on what they call an academic operations council in partnership with their other academic partners in order to create the relatively new academic mission of that academic health center. And both of those oversight roles from the academic side and then governing roles with the hospital partners have given me a pretty wide exposure to the unique opportunity that this invigorated partnership with Fairview offers here. But I'll add one little detail, I think would be the best way to describe it, about what's going on in South Carolina, which is that the 2 separate hospital partners with which each medical school are currently primarily partnered are now merging to form their own larger, wider-reaching hospital system with a wider portfolio of payer mix, a wider geographic reach, wider depth in the clinical enterprise, and a very strong deepening of the academic mission in terms of the core of graduate medical education, but also a wide variety of other clinical experiences and research opportunities, because the thought is that those partnerships are what creates quality in healthcare, and that's where both missions so profoundly align. But align in a way that also creates fiscal opportunities and a situation in which everyone is able to function effectively at the highest quality. So quite a bit of work in that area, very active in real time, admitting students into each of the programs in real time while the business relationship is evolving. So pretty fair amount of work in that regard.
Very good. I'm going to, in the interest of encouraging a much more conversational nature here, let's dispense with following up through me for follow-up and secondary questions, and I'll still call on people to get a question round started. But for instance, Regent Beeson, if you want to follow up on anything there, don't work back through me. You can deal directly with our candidate, and I won't intervene unless someone's monopolizing too much of your time. So, all right, let's great starting point there, Regent Beeson. That's a monumentally important aspect of what we have going on. Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I had drawn up a question on academic health and its mission because that's important to me. But since you just answered one on that, I want to ask you a little bit about leadership style is important, and maybe it's just best to leave it open and explain to us what is your leadership style with collaboration and things like that. Do you have something you would call a style?
You know, my husband did his doctorate in leadership, and he gave me several tests while he was pursuing his program. And I test collaborative, I'm pleased to report, which I know is what everyone is supposed to say. But When I was at the Morris campus, I had an interesting conversation with the students there relating my own liberal arts experience, and sometimes it's in the questions that you receive that you're not remembering that you realize where some of your thoughts and ideas come from. You know, that's one of the pleasures of being around students. And we were talking about their educational experience and my own, and the institution that I went to has an affiliation with the Quakers. And the Quakers have a variety of core values, one of which is consensus. And they make decisions by consensus, everything. Every decision is made that way in the interest of a variety of positive outcomes, including an environment of trust. And we were talking about how that has framed my own journey. And I realized in that moment, in a way that I had not, because I had never really reflected on it in that way, that it's from the very beginnings of my sort of own development from youth into adulthood that I have thought that working together and collaborating was how you reach the best outcome. And experienced also from the earliest phases of my own maturation, the frustration of having to compromise, of having to engage in what we would in our environment call shared governance, but in any environment we would call collaboration, that you have to think of a greater good and be vulnerable to the fact that some people's ideas may be better than your own. And that has fundamentally informed my own leadership, which is that in the kind of work we do in higher education, it is impossible to have expertise in everything that we do. By design, we develop incredible depth in our own individual expertise, and to steward and facilitate excellence in all of those individual areas requires surrounding yourself with people who have expertise that you don't, who have talents that you don't, and then letting them do their job. So working together to build a robust team that balances each other, creating an environment where people feel free to express their opinion, and creating from either a collaboration or, where appropriate, from a visioning set specifically by the leader, as the case may be, a set of goals that you work on together and try to find the best outcomes based on that collective wisdom.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right, Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Provost Gable, thank you for your interest and a very long, aggressive week of interviews and meeting the people of Minnesota.
My pleasure.
There are many marks and criteria about a leader. And as potentially the president of the University of Minnesota, public relations, fundraising, all of those things which come to mind. But one of the things that I look for in a leader is what I call crisis management. Mm-hmm. We all know in this institution of 65,000 students, 18,000 faculty, staff, something is going to happen. Totally out of your control, right. Potentially the president. My question is, what is your plan for crisis management? How are you and your team going to approach it?
I have some experience with that as well, Regent Johnson. There are, first of all, my field is risk management, so to some degree I study this, but there's always a difference in the aggregate study and the real experiences. And we have had some unfortunate real experiences with crises while I've been in leadership positions. So there are crises that you can predict and crises that you can't, or crises that sometimes give you a little warning and crises that don't. Like in South Carolina, we will know for several days that the hurricane is coming, and we've had, unfortunately, quite a few of those over the last few years. Or you can have events that you can't predict that we could list but probably won't. And so what we do now is all of us have gone through executive training on risk through Harvard's continuing education program. I did that within a few weeks of arriving at the University of South Carolina. So I've had executive level training on managing crises, particularly in the context of higher education. We have developed enterprise risk management methodology with leadership around how to, as much as possible, predict risk, weight those risks, and determine which ones are tolerable and which ones are not. And for the tolerable risks, do as much active prevention as we possibly can. For example, We know if students are going to travel that there is some risk associated with being in cars, being away from home, all of the things that might be associated. But of course, we want students out and about and having experiences. So what are we doing actively beforehand to mitigate risk as much as one possibly can? And we heat map all of that across the board of the large, as you exactly correctly described, complex institution with which we all work and give our hearts to. And for those that are intolerable, we work on a policy practice so that we can make sure that the known intolerable risks are prevented as much as one can govern ahead of time. And then we do things like buy insurance and have reserves and do a lot of training and make sure that we have the right people around the table. We do tabletop exercises. We keep a red team ready for when we have to communicate. And we rinse and repeat and hope it never happens.
Thank you.
All right, Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. Welcome again, and thank you for your hard work all week.
Thank you.
Somebody mentioned this, and I think it's in line with one of the questions. Here at the University of Minnesota, I've noticed that shared governance is alive and well and really important. And so I'm wondering what you would do to keep it that way and even improve upon it.
Yes, the faculty have been very clear, as have the staff and students, about how much they treasure the culture of shared governance. It's an attraction in the position because you're picking up a very positive momentum rather than engaged in a fix where there's been a loss of trust in the shared governance process. We don't have that here. And obviously, I find that very appealing. And so I think there are many attributes of the culture here where the next president's job is to make sure it keeps going rather than having to do a fundamental pivot. And I would consider the shared governance culture one of those attributes, one of those really positive aspects. So the active engagement with the various channels with which faculty governance meets and shares with administration, a high degree of availability and transparency, lots of internal communication, which requires a lot of purposeful thought about making sure that what happens while you're nose down trying to get the work of the day done is clear and transparent, and a really thoughtful and purposeful process that I have found to be very effective of sometimes doing even more than the policy requires in terms of who you put around the table when you're making major decisions or trying to set goals that would guide future major decisions with faculty, staff, and students so that they really can provide input and express voice in the way that makes them feel most comfortable as the university moves forward. Thank you.
Regent Lucas.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about athletics.
Yes.
And I've heard you refer to the fact that athletics is in some ways the front porch of the university. And I agree with that. But our front porch is unique in many ways. We're very proud of our Olympic teams, our grade point averages, we do so many things well here, but we also compete in a community with 5 professional sports. And so it's a different landscape, and we depend on the revenue sports, and we need to continue to support them. And I'm just wondering, as you look at this landscape and this particular front porch, what you think?
Well, I think I'm a fan. I think I like that the axe is here. I think I like that there is so much opportunity here, and the momentum is so positive. And I think I like that within the system we have a national championship hockey team. So I think that the starting point is excellent. That doesn't mean there aren't challenges, fiscal and otherwise. The notion of athletics as a front porch, I can't take credit for that expression. I stole it shamelessly from one of my colleagues from a previous institution with which I worked, the athletic director there. And what he has said and what I learned from him is that the front porch is great as long as the front porch is pretty, right? It's essentially very important that the entire system of athletics work well, that we remember that our athletes are students and that we remember at the end of the day what we're about, and that what athletics does for us is bring the community together, and it creates this real enhancement of the sense of community, and it creates a visibility for the overall brand of the university and a visibility for all the other things that the university does, which may not have as obvious a way to be spotlighted. And so all of that is wonderful. But it is very important to make sure that the program is run well, the fact that the APRs, the academic progress rates, are so strong here, that there is excellence across sports is really positive. It creates something for everyone, which I think is what the mission of athletics and student athletes in an institution like this, anchored in academic excellence, should be. And it needs to be able to function. It's a business at the end of the day. It has to be fiscally sound. And so efforts to make sure that the fan experience is the kind of thing that can compete, that there is a reason that people would come, that they are able to enjoy their experience, I know is a strategic priority of the athletic director and the coaches and the entire staff. And I look forward to learning more about that and being able to see a few games.
Regent Swigum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Provost Gable, are you tired yet?
I'm not even close.
That's awesome, because I'm a little bit greedy, and I want to take your enthusiasm and your energy and your talent and bring this university to the level it can be. To reach our, I think, Regent Lucas, we heard the word headroom, did we not? To reach that headroom. So we're going to look at you and your talents and your energy to help us do that.
Thank you.
If we choose you.
Fair enough.
or if you choose us, maybe that. You've spent the last 3 days traveling over 1,200 miles, going through some rich, fertile South Central farmland, to the Red River Valley with the deepest dirt in the country, over to Duluth and through the grasslands and the timberlands and down to Rochester. You've seen turkey barns, you've seen hog barns, and you've seen cattle barns.
I have.
Minnesota's an agricultural state, so a lot of my friends in the agricultural community, the organizations, the commodity groups, are interested in your interests, your commitment to production agriculture, to the research, to the outreach, to the education, which is necessary. Kind of a big general question. Can you respond?
Of course. I have to also add that we saw Paul Bunyan in the Blue Ox in Bemidji. I want to make sure everyone knows that we stopped there too. So that was a wonderful.
Don't get Regent Anderson started on 7th District monuments, okay?
I have photographic evidence. You will not be surprised to hear that at every stop we made, the Extension Office staff and community partners came out in force to share exactly the sentiment that you described, the importance of each campus to the various aspects of local industry, in particular agribusiness, how that affects the community and what it means for greater Minnesota and the state as a whole. I've seen the data on the importance of the sector as a part of the fiscal environment of the state. But of course, what you see in face-to-face conversations is the importance of the sector to the community, how passionate and important it is to the individuals who have invested generations in this type of work. And what has been said to me more than once is, and was an incredibly wonderful thing to hear, is that the university has always been there for them when they needed it. And I think that is, if that's not core mission of a land-grant university, I don't know what is. So the idea that that's what this university does is cornerstone. It has been since the very beginning, since before Minnesota was a state. So the idea that we wouldn't continue to do that is, it's not even on the radar. But what is on the radar is what that might mean for the future. When you have a presence in literally every county, when you already have that kind of exchange in the community, and when you already have that passion for the mission, on campus reaching out, off campus reaching in, system-wide, then what's next? What do you do in addition to supporting the agricultural community? What else can you do through extension to fulfill the original mission of the Morrill Act, which was to elevate and prepare each community for its best self or its best fiscal position? And that's the kind of thing that I think your next president will have the opportunity to do, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity.
Regent Johnson, before I go to others, you signaled maybe an interest in this topic.
I have an interest, but I have a different issue to bring up.
Well, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Again, Provost, 2, maybe 3 thoughts. The 12 of us sitting around this boardroom has been said many times, if not the most important vote, close to the most important vote by selecting the next president of the university. My first question is this. It's about relationships of the regent to the president, president to regents. Let's just say that you are the next president and you and I have a disagreement about policy or procedure or whatever. How are you going to proceed in that disagreement? It could be minor, it could be whatever. How do you approach that?
That's an interesting question. I, of course, would start by saying that I have full respect for the authority of the Board of Regents, both as a group and individually, who are, elected publicly to govern the university. So that is always the starting point, I think, of any conversation with a president and a regent with whom they have a disagreement. But I may be biased by my legal training. I believe that it's through civil disagreement that sometimes the very best ideas emerge, and that it's okay to disagree in the appropriate and respectful way, and that that's often how you find solutions that each individual party might not think of otherwise. And so what I have found on the pretty rare occasion when I've had a disagreement with a colleague, a subordinate, or someone to whom I report is that listening is critically important. Entrenchment is something that one should shed as much as possible, and that what you want is to make sure that you have a shared understanding of where you're trying to go so that you can find the same kind of compromise in order to get there. And so I would hope we would have an open exchange where we would feel comfortable talking to each other about why we disagree, and that we would move forward to something that we can both live with.
Thank you. Different issue that's certainly on the minds of many people across higher ed, and that's the achievement gap.
Yes.
That I'm sure in South Carolina, as Provost, you face that issue. We face it here at Minnesota. Can you give us some indication, were you able to improve on the achievement gap as Provost of University of South Carolina, and plans for improving the gap here at Minnesota?
Yes, so correct. That is a national problem shared by the institution which I'm with now and here, but by virtually everyone. And it is a grand challenge, without question, a grand social challenge, and a variety of other attributes to that challenge. We have made improvements, and I should be very clear that it is literally dozens of people who work on this in order to even see the incremental change that we've seen, in some cases pretty rapid change, and in some cases remaining challenges that I'll describe to you in the interest of transparency. So achievement gaps and work on achievement gaps began with work on students after they arrived, and working on the resources made available to them so that they were maximized in what we would call their progression towards graduation, that are collectively referred to as student success programs. And they were originally, and this would not be that long ago, only a few years ago, focused on how the student arrived, what they had as a strength, what they may have had as a limitation, and trying to steward that student fully into an area of strength so that they would be successful. And what we've learned, and that worked, that helped some. I would say it mitigated. But what we've learned since then is that we really need to start working with students before they arrive, in partnership with K through 12 and in partnership with communities who structure in different ways around their youth, depending on where they are and what their challenges and needs and opportunities are, so that we're reaching students. We started in high school, which would make sense because that's usually where they would be immediately prior to arriving on a university campus, with partnership in K through 12, changes in the conversations around recruitment, things like summer camps, mentorship programs, often lots of work with student athletes who are seen particularly as role models, et cetera. And that helped. That was an incremental improvement. And what we're starting to see now is that we need to go even deeper into middle school, and probably eventually in pretty short order into elementary school. So what's starting to happen in middle school is we're taking students and bringing them to campus, and what the early data is showing us, it doesn't have to be to see campus like you would see it as a college student. They're probably a little young for that, but things like camps and after school programs, weekend programs that demystify the campus experience are, we think, going to yield some real appreciation for the higher education opportunity, and also a willingness to make the tough choices and the self-sacrifices so that they're ready by the time they come. And then, by the way, still continuing to work on the experience once the students arrive. That is a team sport. It is a continuous learning environment, how we're improving, advising, how we're creating a sense of belonging, how faculty and staff are identifying so that students can find mentors where they may not otherwise find them, living learning communities. I could go on and on about what we're always continuously doing on campus, but where we're seeing the real widening of the slice is in what we're doing for students before they come.
Thank you for that. Just another brief comment, and that is a different issue. I believe under Dr. Eric Kaler, he has assembled one of the finest senior leadership teams that I've had occasion to work with over the last 12 years. Many of them are sitting behind you today. If you're given the opportunity and privilege to be the president, and you have every right to select your team, and they've not asked me to say this, but I hope...
I wish I could see their body language right now.
I would hope that you would retain many of them, of course, if they want to be retained, but I say that publicly and sincerely. They are the best of the best. So thank you, and I yield my time.
Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, Provost Gable. I really appreciate your response to Regent Sviggum's comment about agriculture in Greater Minnesota and animal health. That's of interest to me. Also, your recent comments here on the gap and reaching out to K through 12, and it's just another very important issue to me. But I'd like to go back, see if you'd expand a little bit on, in your opening comments, you talked about the system as a whole, and then secondly, revenue producing programs. One of the things that I've heard discussed here as far as system as a whole, we have 5 campuses, but I like to think we're one university.
Yes.
But there's been questions or comments about that and discussion about that. For example, if I apply to the Twin Cities campus and get a no, maybe I can go to one of the other campuses. Is that like being put down? You know, how do you unify that type of thing? I'm given a secondary choice. And how would you approach that? And the other thing is, each campus has some specialties, but there also a lot of overlap, and how we could maybe reduce cost by changing that. So that's one of it. And then the other one, as far as revenue producing programs, you mentioned that. I'd like to hear what you think on that, because we talk a lot about tuition. We had a discussion yesterday. I'd like tuition to be our main revenue producing way to go about it. Or donations, grants, funding, other funding. What other things do you have in mind, and what's been your experience there?
So I'll start with systemness, if I may, and then we'll talk about alternate revenue. So I work in a system now, 8-campus system, geographically spread across the state. The portfolio is slightly different because there are 2-year schools in the University of South Carolina system. And the University of Missouri is also a land-grant multi-campus system, 4 campuses in that system. What is different here, among other things, but as a primary in the navigation of how you work together as a multi-campus system, is exactly what you said, is that each campus does have a signature, and that signature is respected and appreciated by the community, but also has appeal for students across the state. In many systems, the system campuses are intended to be a geographic anchor only, which is not necessarily a bad strategy, but it is a different strategy, and it yields a different set of opportunities and challenges. What I really like about this system is that you have pretty extensive geographic reach, but you also have a signature capacity on each campus that can contribute locally, but it can contribute statewide, and in some cases well beyond the state in the research or unique type of instruction, unique partnerships, et cetera, that they offer. So while there are things to continuously navigate and balance about the role of each campus, the role of having a really big campus at the center of things, and almost literally, physically speaking, and also just by virtue of size, so that each signature is valued and appreciated, but also can elevate up into an overall strategy. That's a challenge. It's a leadership challenge. One of the things that I think is opportunistic, just in terms of timing, is that the phase that the system is in with strategic planning. I think that the strategic planning process, which I know will resume and reinvigorate soon, is one of the best ways to receive the kind of input and go through the kind of priority setting where you can figure out where you see strengths that deserve additional attention, where you see strengths that you think you can maintain, and where you see things that perhaps need to evolve into something else. And it is built for shared governance. It's built for shared input from this group and from a representative committee working together. And so I think we're at exactly the right time to together, over an appropriate but not overly extended period of time, try to find some specific answers to how that would actually, in a tactical way, be led and managed. It also actually is a way to inform alternate revenue as well, because alternate revenue is a really wide umbrella, and you could ask 10 higher ed administrators and they would give you 10 different answers about what it means, and they would all be right and all be wrong. You know, it all depends on context and opportunity and availability. But generally speaking, when we talk about alternate revenue, I think we're talking about where we might have audiences for what we already do that we aren't currently reaching, who may be willing to pay for what we offer, whether it's curricula or attributes of the research enterprise, or some aspects of the community engagement that we could enhance into something that would be monetizable. There's also things like commercialization and tech transfer. There's a tremendous amount of discovery. I heard the president rattle off a fair number of patents coming out, and I know that that is a real point of pride, and no reason to think that that wouldn't continue. What opportunities lie there? And there's always the hope for continued support from the state and continued stewardship of tuition, so that you create access while also creating fiscal stability, so that you have the foundation, fiscally speaking, to be able to take some risk in the other areas and see if they yield. You have to have an entrepreneurial mindset, which I think all of higher ed is coming around to, and I see a lot of that here. But we also have to be very circumspect, because not every entrepreneurial venture succeeds. So you want to make sure that as you take strategic risk, that you're anchored in a fair bit of stability so that mission is never threatened.
I'm going to jump in and pick up on an element of Regent Simonson's question there. States, every state, and Minnesota in particular, needs electrical engineers, and we need electricians. And I'm curious what you've learned leading a system with some two-year elements of it, and how you can bring 2- and 4-year programs together to meet state workforce development needs, because I think we're going to get called on to do that. And while the University of Minnesota won't be the place where we're training electricians, it feels to me like there's a lot of good we can do there in partnership with our sister system, the Minnesota State system. But you've actually had a chance to lead that, to do 2- and 4-year pieces. Maybe you can say something about how you see those partnering and doing better outcomes.
I would be delighted to talk about that. So the 2-year schools that are within the University of South Carolina system today are not the technical colleges. They are community colleges, junior colleges, depending on which vocabulary you're most comfortable with. And they have associate degree programs, but for the most part do not teach the technical fields. The electrician would go through the technical college system and be very well served in the state of South Carolina. Unlike Minnesota, the technical college system, except for one recently approved exception, does not have the ability to offer a 4-year degree. So The students who go through that system have tremendous employment prospects. There are unmet workforce needs, a slightly different portfolio given the economy and the industries that are in that state, but the same aggregate workforce challenge. The students can't go through those programs fast enough to meet the need. But what we see in very short order with those students is that they sometimes are extremely fulfilled by their career. The job they receive upon graduation is the fulfilling moment for them professionally, and some of them want to advance. And the ones who want to advance often work in companies or industries where that advancement requires a bachelor's degree, or where they would be a better candidate for that advancement if they had the bachelor's degree. And so we try to partner and be a very effective partner and sort of reach across the aisle, so to speak, in order to make degree completion a viable option, especially for a non-traditional student who is well employed and may suffer financially or otherwise if they have to leave their workday in order to attend class. So there is a very distinct mission that is of relative recency at the University of South Carolina to be across the system in different ways, a home for students of non-traditional start to have a nice traditional finish with a bachelor's degree that would prepare them for a full career. So the service into the trades, I think, is not core mission, but the service into the progression, I think, is very much core mission.
Good. Regent Simonson, I interrupted the flow of your conversation. I think you probably had some more to go.
Thank you. Just to follow up on
Sure.
the revenue-producing programs, a little more specific. I can't say I'm onboarding anymore, but I'm relatively new. When I looked at the 2019 budget, okay, and $3.8 billion roughly, 25% of it is tuition, okay, in that ballpark. Where 7%, something like that, is alternative revenues. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see that part grow and the other part decrease. I don't care as much about the top line, but I'd like to see that. Do you think that's a reasonable target?
I think it's a reasonable target. It's a little counterculture to talk about rolling back tuition. It's almost easier to see tuition holding or increasing below certain indices while you backfill with other types of support, including alternate revenue when it's available. And I think the way you do that, it's a bit of a long game. You know, you have to make the investments in the type of activities that yield alternate revenue, give them time to reach essentially profitability, if you want to think of it that way. In the same way in industry, you very rarely come out of the gate making money. And so you have to have the right appetite for how it takes a little time to widen some parts of that pie, slices of that pie, and narrow others. But as a strategy, I absolutely see that.
Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair. So, Provost Gable, we talked a little bit about this at the lunch, and so my question has to do again with the university's research mission, which is it's really prospered under President Kaler's leadership. We're a critical part of the nation's research structure, and we produce lots of PhDs, a huge number. And the board, I think, is very interested in seeing that continue to grow and develop. And so I'm just interested in your thoughts on the research mission, and particularly your kind of strategic perspective on what can we do to continue to support the growth of that enterprise, which is really important to the state and the nation.
Of course. So the research mission is clearly a signature of this university. It is what it's known for, and among other things, and it is tremendously successful. But what I know many of my colleagues at other institutions have seen is it's definitely not something upon which one can rest on their laurels. It's the sort of thing that requires a purposeful reinvestment. And I don't just mean fiscally, although, of course, that would be included in incentivizing faculty to be productive and having a really distinct awareness of how the university is working with the funding agencies, that you're providing the support for the faculty to remain engaged in that part of the conversation as well as in their own work, and including investing in doctoral programs and PhD students who are, and postdocs who are, of course, lifeblood of the sustainability of a research enterprise. The work that Dr. Kramer is doing, even in short order, is the sort of thing where when news of my candidacy became public, my inbox filled with accolades about what has happened here before and what he's already doing. I think there is tremendous leadership in place there. I've also had the chance to meet with the deans, who are his partners administratively and who help him multiply the effect across the faculty. They are equally committed. And I should say very specifically, not just in the types of research that result in extramural funding, which of course is enormous, but in other areas of scholarship that may not yield extramural funding, but for which the university is extremely well known in the humanities, social sciences, arts, applied fields, et cetera. Also highly productive. If you do different types of mapping of research productivity, it exceeds peer in virtually every type of measure, because I looked, so you might not be surprised. So lots of good news there. Reinvigoration with leadership transition from one excellent leader to another in the Vice President for Research office. Very clear commitment by the President that this is still absolute cornerstone strategic priority of the university. Very clear signaling to the deans and faculty that they have your support. It's always extremely rewarding for faculty to hear the governing board say that they think research is important, that they think it's part of what the university does. And then I think also a real partnership with something that we have not done so much in higher education, but that you're starting to see more and more of, which is figuring out how to tell the story of the research enterprise and not just assume that it speaks for itself, because so much of what we do as scholars is peer-to-peer. We assess each other's research, we vote on each other, we decide in review panels who's funded, we decide in editorial processes who's published, and that's talking to each other, and that is how we establish and have always established academic pedigree, if you will. But if we want people to appreciate what we do and the value of what we do, we have to translate sometimes some very complicated and fundamentally expert level work into an appropriate, digestible conversation for our partners so that they can hear and see and appreciate it as well. And I think that's the job of the President on behalf of.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to inquire about whether this was a single ticket affair or whether we got wristbands, and I think Regent Johnson shows that we might have an opportunity to ask another question on another topic as we go.
You can ride several times.
Very good. It's my favorite. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Provost Gable, your qualifications as a member of Generation X with a law degree are certainly commendable.
And shared.
I note that in the Big Ten, the average Big Ten president of recent vintage has a tenure roughly between 5 and 6 years. We've been fortunate here that our president has been here longer than that. Although I see your position as, you could potentially be a generational leader for the University of Minnesota, provided the two-way component of being a good fit for the university, the board, and the state works on our end, and that this is a good fit for you. And that leads to the question, why Minnesota? And to expand on that a little bit, what other aspirations or interests might you have that would lead you to consider moving on at some point, despite the fact that we would hope to retain your services here? If you could just talk about that a little bit, I think that would be I think meaningful, certainly to me and to a lot of folks here that would have that same question.
Thank you for that. So earlier in the week, I answered a different version of that question in sort of the spur of the moment when one receives a question that maybe they weren't expecting. And so I've had a little time to reflect on that, the luxury of reflecting on that. And I think, one, I do think that there is, the national average that you cite is correct. It's true, I think at most R1 schools and not just in the AAU, that cycles are shorter than we might otherwise like on either side of the conversation. And some of that is a factor of the age of the president when they come on board. And so I do see coming into a position a little earlier than has happened in the past as an advantage that I hope is a mutual advantage, because what I've been able to do in order to feel good about my work, which I think is what has to happen in order to feel like you're keeping going, is I've been in environments where I've been able to evolve. So when we talk about exchange with the president and the board, or exchange with the president, the executive team, exchange with the president and the faculty, staff, and students, exchange with the president and the chancellors on each campus, you think about whether there is a climate for an appropriate, circumspect, and yet continuous evolution, so that you're always thinking about how you're nurturing core values, but also retaining a margin where you can be provocative, where you can ask hard questions, where you can think about what might be next, where you can think about what it means to be a university of the future. It's one of the most attractive components of this university, is that you have, without question, legacy and reputation, and that you have a discernible inventory of innovation. Is not the story everywhere. Sometimes the bigger and older you are, the less you see of that, because the origins are so deep and strong, there hasn't been any appetite at all for much change. And that's just simply not the case here. So what I said then is what I'll say today, which is, as long as I'm doing good work, in your collective wisdom, I'm doing good work. If it feels like we're able to come up with good ideas, see the way through on those ideas, we're moving forward on a shared vision, I don't see why you would stop doing that. And that's what I've been working towards for a little while now, and that's what I want to do for as long as I'm in a position to do it.
Thank you.
Regent Shu, I haven't seen your wristband yet, and then we'll go with the rest of them. So,
Thank you. I was afraid I didn't have one.
I'll give you one.
Thank you. Provost Gable, thank you so much for coming in and going through an extensive tour of the state of Minnesota and interview process, and being here today, of course. Last week, when we selected you as our finalist, I made some comments about none of the finalists seemingly having any connection to Minnesota. And I want to correct that, because I've since learned that that's not quite true, and maybe give you a chance to correct that and explain that, and then I'll go forward with the other questions.
Thank you. I do have family who live here, and one member of one of the closest family friends, the kind of friends who show up at my kids' school for Grandparents' Day, even though they're not blood relatives, friends, live here. So it's not this level of connection that President Kaler had as an alum of the institution, and I understand that's something that would be part of my onboarding, but it is not a standing start. I'm delighted to say that I do have some pre-existing appreciation for the state of Minnesota.
Thank you, and I'm glad we had a chance to correct that, and before I take too much heat on it. I didn't have a chance to meet you until this week, and I did have some input into the core leadership criteria that I'm sure you have memorized. And there were
I hope there's not a test.
There were some jokes about the person having to be able to walk on water in order to kind of be able to hit all the categories here. And after hearing all the great things about you, I figured at least you could take a couple steps on water before sinking.
Frozen or?
Yeah, I was going to say, is it frozen?
But I do have a question. So when you first looked at this leadership criteria, where are the areas where you thought you were, best suited, and maybe give us an idea of where some of the areas where you were less strong in terms of, just looking at this the first time?
There's been some research that actually would have preceded the development of the position profile. I wouldn't say it's in approximately the last 3 years, that different organizations have done in higher education about what is expected of the next cycle of university presidents and how broad a spectrum of skills and competencies university presidents need to have, and what does that mean for the future of the academy. And the types of skills and competencies that research identified are virtually identical to what ultimately made its way into your position profile and the core competencies that you developed through your shared governance process. So it was not a surprise to see the position profile crafted in the way that it was. And it's not a surprise that that's what you see as the needs of a successful president for this institution. It is a hard job. It's a complicated job. It is a team sport. No one can individually do everything that is listed in the position profile. And so I would urge you, as I would urge any board making a decision of this importance, to look for someone with a track record of building a team that gap fills for them as individuals and that collectively has a set of strengths that rise up above the individual strengths of the members of the leadership team, and then a leader with the type of leadership style that can be vulnerable to other people's good ideas taking the day where appropriate, because that's what it will take to be able to do all the things that the next president needs to do, and that's what this university deserves.
Thank you. And one area that I'm particularly interested in is, and you've been here for a week already, so I'm not going to hold you to this, but do you have any ideas of, a vision that you might have or you might bring to the university?
Arguably, that's the trickiest question that one gets at this phase of the conversation. And I want to be very clear to say that while I feel as if I've had just the most wonderful running start in onboarding, that there is still a lot to learn, and that these processes require not only time but input. And that is one of the things that I haven't had the chance to steward is anything formally around shared governance, which would be critical to giving an official answer to a question like that. But with that said, I think there is a combination of things that would eventually rise up to a vision going forward. One is that there are a lot of things that are already excellent that you don't want to undermine or even ruin, which you can by a failure to pay appropriate attention and make the appropriate investments of time or talent. So I think there is a sense of developing a real understanding of the things that are already really great and making sure that they are at a minimum continue at their level of excellence, if not improve. The new relationship with Fairview is clearly a tremendous and unique opportunity for the Academic Health Center and for what that means for the university as a whole. One of the things that we've done where I'm currently affiliated is really look at health sciences, education, and research as a transcendent area of study. There are the very obvious clinical areas, but how it feeds in from across campus, everywhere from health administration to biomedical engineering. I don't even want to make a list because I will leave someone important out, but it is not a sacrifice of any other area of excellence in the university to make a strategic investment in the kind of relationship that the Fairview partnership has the potential to yield. And I think there are some other areas of real innovation from the research enterprise that have come through the Provost Grand Challenges initiative that probably could elevate to a similar stature. But how you would rank those, what else in addition to those, what it would mean in terms of community engagement, where there is a real competitive distinction in the systemness that we haven't really gotten our arms all the way around yet. That's the kind of thing that you want to really get people around the table with a well-paced but appropriate amount of time for input and discussion and reflection, and then set those as goals in a strategic plan, and then figure out the tactics for implementation and go.
Thank you.
I'm going to deepen that conversation just a bit around vision and see what, now that you've had a chance to explore the state a little. Minnesota is unique in a lot of ways. We are the state's only land-grant research university, and but we're also a unique state in that we have, as Regents Simonson and Swigum have visited with you already, about this intensely rural, classically agricultural background as you get up and attributes as you head up into northern Minnesota. Of course, any meeting without me mentioning resource-based industries would be, not a good meeting, so I'll throw that in. And that's classically rural too, and yet here is this immense and prideful and culturally amazing big metropolitan area where our biggest campus sits. And is there room in that vision? And you're not crafting one yet in response to Regent Shu's question, which I think is highly appropriate, but you're starting to, frame it up. And how do you take the uniquely urban and rural attributes of this state and match that against what a land-grant university has classically been thought of and what it might evolve to in the future? Any thoughts around that?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts around that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a lot of multi-campus land-grant universities share the passionate core moral act, core value of elevating the business of agriculture, but also in the community way that you described with the depth of pride. And there's some real national success and momentum around that, but very few of them also have a campus in the major metropolitan area. That is a competitive distinction. It creates a management challenge. It creates a brand challenge. It creates a variety of challenges. It's not without tension or friction, but it's also a real distinction, a competitive advantage that is unique. And so figuring out how to navigate that, figuring out through the process that I described in response to Regent Shu is exactly what this university can do that no one else can do. And so it doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have obstacles to overcome, but overcoming it would be tremendous. Even making progress toward it would be tremendous. And my observation is already happening and has happened, but how you leverage the literal physical position of these campuses in addition to their unique signatures is something I can't see anyone else being able to do without building something from scratch with all of the length and expense that would require.
Thank you. So my colleagues know I've got lots of additional names here. I think everybody that's wanted to has had an opening stab, and we're going to kind of take round two, although, as you know, the wristband enables you to ask multiple questions at one time. So, Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe this question has been asked in certain forms, but I'm going to ask it again. Because, Provost Gable, you're impressively articulate and knowledgeable, and I imagine that you could choose a lot of different universities to either be provost or president, probably. And so I'm wondering, why the University of Minnesota?
Thank you for the vote of confidence and for the question. The challenges surrounding higher education have been, I think it's fair to say, hard on those of us who have spent our entire careers, or in my case, the bulk of my career in higher education. That when I started as an assistant professor, the value proposition, the prestige, the certainty of the understanding of why it didn't require an overt conversation. If you said you worked at a university, if you said you were a member of the academy, if you told someone you were a professor, when you were with your colleagues at conferences, there was a presumption of value that is, I don't think in any way gone, but is being questioned in ways that it was not before. And that is unsettling at a minimum, and sometimes more, it has an even stronger impact than that. And it has been a really fundamental culture shift for all of us who are faculty, and I think in unique ways for those of us who are administrators, to shift from talking about why our own work is good, why our own work should be published or funded or performed or heard in whatever way it would be, to here's why what we do is of value, here's why you should let us steward your child's entire life. Here's why you should give us your dollar, your tax dollar, your research dollar, your ticket sale dollar, your whatever dollar. And we never had to answer that question before. And it in many cases feels almost unseemly to be in a position to answer that question. It's just really cannot express enough how counterculture it is. And we're making, I think, discernible progress. But you say to yourself, when you're seeing what one could arguably call a disruption in an entire sector, the person who would be charged with saying those things, doing those things, answering that question, you ask yourself pretty hard, well, where do I want to answer it? You know, where do I want to affiliate myself? Because I'm going to be behind a microphone with cameras in my face answering that question, and I want to be proud when I do. I want to know what's behind it. I want if I'm a president, I want to embody something where the value is easy to describe. And I want to be able to both be able to describe it and be able to surround myself with a team that makes sure that value is ongoing, deepening, broadening, and is mission driven in a way where 160 plus years from now, someone would be answering this question and say, well, look at what's happened for this centuries of work that we've been doing. And so you look at that, because I have colleagues who are answering a very different set of questions than the one that you just asked me. And what I see here is an incredible commitment to the state of Minnesota, where you see it baked in at the very core from the very beginning that even precedes the state itself. That is so lovely in the idea of what it means to be a university here. You see it in the passion of every single person you visit. And I know I have a lot more people to visit, but it has been consistent with everyone that I've seen so far. You see it in how the students feel about their campus. Even the students who want to express their voice through protest can and do, and they do. And that's exactly what we should be able to do as the kind of institution that we are, in addition to their advocacy for how they study and what their community on campus and beyond campus is like. And the faculty are so committed to their scholarship, there's so much pride in the quality of what they're doing and what it means for their area of study, but also what it means for the university. And then there's so much pride in all of the, what it means to be a part of a university, to be a fan, to attend an event, to, hear the music, see the team win, all of the things that are part of what it means to be here that don't necessarily exist in other learning environments. I think that anyone would be really proud to answer that question here, and I would be incredibly honored if it was me.
Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Provost, this is a bigger job than you have now.
That's true.
This is a much bigger stage. And Minnesotans want to know their university president by face and by name. And I think next to the governor, this is the most important public official relationship. I don't know if it's a Minnesota thing, but with your energy and with your approachability, and given what I've just said, I would say it's a concern, but an issue about how you manage your time and how you, what your self-awareness is of being able to do the job and the pressure of meeting the public and how you'd manage your time. Can you begin to talk about that?
Sure. I've had a taste these last few days, and I think
this would just be the beginning.
Of course, yes. Absolutely. There's no question that the work of the provost is different than the work of the president. I work for a very visible president now and have a tremendous mentor in him. I've watched him figure out how to refuel and refresh, and he has been keeping me alongside him for a few years now. So I have had some very close proximity observation of what the demands of the job are and what some of the coping mechanisms need to be. I have a tremendous family who are extremely supportive and who allow me to strike a balance in a way that I know not everybody is able to by virtue of just the nature of our relationships with each other. Very, very grateful for them. And I'm healthy and I take good care of myself and I have a lot of energy, which I know has been said many times, but it's true. And when I feel good about what I'm doing, I really can, I have a lot of, there's some depth off the bench in how long I can go at it. But I also am very careful, you know, I'm conscientious about my health and work very hard at it and make commitments to it that are pretty sacred to me. So I work with my assistant to manage my calendar that way so that I can get those things managed in a way that still leaves me available. And what I'm available to now is not as public as what I would be available to on the next stage. But in terms of hours in the day, it's not altogether dissimilar, and we figure it out.
A follow-up question, Mr. Chair. So if things are running perfectly, right, and how often does that happen? But what percentage of the time should a president be involved in philanthropy and relationship building with donors?
Mm-hmm. When I was a dean and philanthropy was one of my primary responsibilities, a little more then than now as provost, I used to say I spent 60% of my time doing philanthropy, but that of course meant that there was more than 8 hours in the day. So and philanthropy of course has taken on an even broader, I mean, what do we mean by that now versus then? Of course it's gifts in the traditional sense of that word, but it's also how you engage with corporate partners. I think you could even think of it broadly if we were to use the word advancement, which is a not uncommon vocabulary word for this, where we look at philanthropy, governmental affairs, corporate partnerships, alumni engagement, et cetera, all having the potential to yield in a variety of ways, including financial support for the institution. But the thing about philanthropy is sometimes there are very specific things that start and end that are a philanthropic experience where you are visiting with a potential donor and it's this many minutes of the day to get to that person, visit with that person, and come home, where you could do a percentage of the day. But so much of what we do in the modern era around philanthropy is in the broader advocacy that we've been talking about a few times, which transcends everything else that you do. So I would say it's absolutely a core component of what you should expect from a president. It takes a lot of time, but it's not something that requires you to stop everything else. A lot of it overlaps. And so but you do have to be purposeful about it, and you have to have it top of mind.
Good. I'm going to intercept my work through the Regents for a second time here to give Regional Maury an opportunity to
Thank you,
ask a question.
Chair McMillan. Several thoughts and questions, but I'll just start with a thought that comes back to something that was mentioned earlier about the senior leadership team, and I don't disagree that it is an extremely talented group of folks. At the same time, if voted to be the president, you will be the president. You will select your senior leadership team, and we will give you a vote of confidence. But by no means do I want you to think that we will be selecting your leadership team for you.
Thank you.
That is your role to play. So a few questions that I have that I hoped I wouldn't have to ask, but here we go. Can anybody guess? Equity in students. So first and foremost, I'm wondering, as you think about the presidency being a public, civic-minded role, and then you think about the broader external community, in what areas, from a civic perspective, would you like to lead and engage?
That's a great question. What I do right now is largely channeled through participation on the board of United Way, and co-chairing the capital campaign for United Way for the last couple of years in partnership, interestingly, with the president of the local hospital. Back to our first question. What I have enjoyed about United Way particularly is that it's a funnel agency, so you can feel the ability to support a variety of civic missions that can operate in different scale by virtue of that model. And so that's worked for me as a type of civic engagement in the work that I do now. I'm also involved a little more indirectly in something in partnership with the former First Lady of South Carolina called City of Women, which I've really enjoyed seeing her lead and helping her do. But the work of civic engagement, I mean, what I do right now for United Way is very time consuming. And as a function of United Way, I probably couldn't do, given the demands on the day that we've previously talked about. But you do have a unique position to call attention to and bring focus around your community, and in this case, of course, because of the nature of the role, communities, that you might not be able to do if you hold another position. And so with thought to place, meaning physical place and place in terms of mission, I think that the university president, but also the faculty, staff, and students of the university have the ability to engage. And I said in an earlier conversation, in some of those cases, we have to go beyond what we were originally formulated to do. In order to do that successfully, we were originally designed to receive students after high school, educate them, continue their education into graduate school, launch them, explore areas of discovery in the meantime, rinse and repeat. That was what we were originally organized to do. So getting involved beyond that is part of our evolution. That we've used that word a few times already today. But it's something that I think creates the kind of fulfillment for me personally that keeps you happy in the position, as per our previous conversation, and also the kind of momentum creation that can revitalize and inform the mission of the university in service, but also in research and teaching, as we do experiential learning and applied research that can make the university continue to be excellent, even in its most core way. So with whom or how, I wouldn't say that I could answer that question with specificity, but in some way, I'm pretty sure probably yes.
Thank you. If I may, thank you. Can you give us your thoughts on international education, international students, graduate and undergraduate?
Yes, I would be delighted. My first administrative post was as the interim director of the Institute of International Business at my first university affiliation. At the time, I was wholly unqualified for the job, but I had taught abroad, and so somehow magically that made me tapped on the shoulder to run an entire area for which I have absolutely no expertise. And still don't, by the way. But with that said, it was also a little bit of a lesson in how you can manage and lead sometimes beyond what you actually personally know, which of course I've had to leverage many times and in many ways since. But the notion of how international experiences in the traditional sense, need a passport, get on a plane, create a broad perspective, create an expansion of cross-cultural competency, create an ability to cope with uncertainty, create a sense of empowerment in a student who masters something that they never experienced before, how that appeals to a potential employer, how that creates confidence in further study. I think as I say those things, it's hard to imagine disagreement, and there's also a fair amount of data to back that up. So at a cornerstone, international experiences for students, I think it's what we have to make available. But what we've learned, especially lately, and sometimes through some very challenging conversations, is there's a lot more to internationalization than study abroad, and there's a lot more to a global mindset or cross-cultural competency than travel. So we also want to make sure that we have an environment where people with a variety of perspectives, including those who come by their perspectives from someplace else, can bring them here and share them with us, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's as a speaker, whether it's as an advisor on a board, a mentor, or a member of the faculty or staff, that we are creating a sense of belonging so that different points of view and perspectives are embraced and appreciated and are a learning opportunity. And then we also want to make sure that we have a sense of cross-cultural competency imbued in the curriculum at appropriate moments, governed by the faculty, who of course own the curriculum, but with incentives around why that might be worth their while to pivot off of what they're currently doing into something new where appropriate as curricula evolve. And I think there are really interesting ways to explore global research. Some of that happens obviously, naturally, organically. There are certain questions that are by definition only answered with multicultural teams or multicultural field studies, et cetera. But there are fields that have been by virtue domestic, that you're starting to see exploration around, and then it is incumbent upon the leadership of the university to align resources there, make the risk of a faculty member in moving off of a research trajectory that would be anchored domestically into one that might not be as well accepted in the field, but includes a global mindset worth their while. And you do all that measure where you're seeing cross-cultural competency improve, rinse and repeat.
Can I go one more?
One more, regional.
This was the only one that I planned on asking.
Okay.
You talked about faculty a lot. You talked about research, and there's the student component that I want to hit on, and I'll ask it in this way. What is the single most innovative thing that you have seen or heard of to get to know students and to engage students in the work of administrators?
I always hate picking just one, but I'm going to respect your question and say, because the question is asking for innovation, you really want to say something that has some zing. But the idea, I think, is that it is a simple question, which is we have students at the table for things where we didn't have them before. And not all of that is administrative. We have undergraduate research is widely accepted now, and we didn't even talk about that even just a few years ago. And the way in which we work with student government, how we communicate with students using social media, all of those things I think have become sort of ubiquitous. But we're putting students at the table for leadership level decision making, having them on committees where decisions are made that are pivot point moments for the university, and getting out of the temptation of administrative echo chamber to include their perspective, because they have one and they come by it through thought and a refreshing of point of view that we benefit from. And so when students are at the table, you have to be open, you have to listen. In all shared governance models, including those that include student engagement, you have to slow down so that all inputs have time to be received and reflected upon, and sometimes you want to move faster. But I have learned so much from our students, and I continue to, and what I have said to literally every student I had the pleasure of meeting this week and say to my own, and I don't just say this because some of my children are still in college, is if you are feeling sadness, some sort of negative emotion around the state of affairs that you find yourself in for whatever reason, come onto a college campus, sit in a class, have lunch with some students, mentor a student. You will feel better. You will appreciate how bright the future is. You will be refreshed. And I get to do that every day. So the main thing we've done is do that more formally. And while it does not sound innovative, based on how we've done things in the past, to some degree it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Omari. I'm going to pick up a couple of regents who haven't had as much opportunity with the candidate. I won't forget the ones who are on the list that maybe were on the search committee too. But I want to go to Regent Rocha next, and then Regent Simonson, and then Regent Anderson, and then we'll continue on. And Regent Johnson, I've got you too, plus committee members. But Regent Hsu, got it. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this touches a little bit on your answer to Regent Cohen. Around the time your time at Georgia, about 25 years ago, the university was going through a metamorphosis. We were struggling with a graduation rate of 14%, and we had facilities issues, we had economic challenges, as well as dramatic as any time in the university's history. And the president then, Nils Hassamo, and his team, they had just led the university through a massive restructuring that included closing and consolidating departments, and even closing a system campus. It was not an easy time, and it was not an easy job. Now that year, the board paid President Hassamo $152,300. And in today's dollars, that is the equivalent of $267,000. And that year, the highest Minnesota resident tuition rate for lower division was $2,856. And in today's money, that'd be about $4,998. Now, the reason I bring this up is at the time, and this goes to that question about, well, how do we re-engage the public versus just sort of saying, we wish you would see the value, public opinion was really very high. The president was considered one of the most popular public figures in the state. But at the time, we had public leaders paid about 3 to 4 times what the average Minnesota family lived on at the university as well as at the state level. Whereas I think across higher ed nationally, you're seeing it's 10 to 20 times. And you know, I personally think there's an impact of having that. But if you move to today, the average household in Minnesota, the average is $75,000, but half of our households live on less than $59,000 per year. And then, you know, when you recognize that the rest of the world, family, legislators, they don't have the sort of positive feedback loop of the HEPI to live off of. I'm asking a pretty pointed question. I'm confident that you can handle it, but I just asked the question, how do we make the case? And I've heard you talk about making the case for higher ed, which I think is absolutely fantastic to hear. But how do we make the case to a legislature that struggles to fund social workers and public defenders, support for seniors and so on? How, in that context where higher ed has moved so dramatically from where it was just a quarter century ago, how do we make the case that we are a good investment for additional state dollars to provide that kind of access to our resident students?
A lot has changed in higher education since the period you described, but thank you for telling everybody I was in grad school 25 years ago. A lot has changed since then. The complexity has changed since then. The overall economic impact of the institution back to the state has changed since then. The excellence has continued to improve, and all of that would go into an aggregate fiscal calculation. But to answer your question, I'm a believer in markets. I mean, I come up through business school world, and I believe that things are valued based on what supply and demand dictates. And I think that that would apply here as well and is explainable. It can be benchmarked. It can be compared across peer institutions. It can be compared across similar organizations of similar complexity. And as a result, I think that it can be an overt part of the conversation. It'll be on the front page of the paper for whoever it's for, and that the market behind it should be a part of the conversation.
Just following up on the market consideration, though, where I find it challenging is that for students, when you have a heavily subsidized product, the market acts differently. But more than that is for the $600 million a year the state puts into the university, roughly. What's our market argument? Because when they look at the compensation rates and when they see these costs and I guess sort of the challenge for students then as well, how do you make the case that compared to all these other competing interests, because that sort of becomes its own market, doesn't it? I mean, the market of where they decide to send their money. It's not like they're buying a product specifically; they're just making this investment of public dollars. How would you respond to a gruff rural legislator who's concerned about making sure the dollars are being well protected for their constituents?
Well, I would say first of all that the return on investment that a public dollar should yield on behalf of the university should be measured by far more than the individual salaries of the people who work there. It should be measured by the quality of the institution. And bringing quality people to an institution is a competitive enterprise. Each person who decides to come here, I would assume, has choices, because this is an excellent place and it attracts excellent people who have track records and choices, and you want those people to make the choice to come here. And that decision is based on a variety of factors, including the fact that they are recognized for the quality of the work that they've done in their position in the marketplace. And it is that investment in the people of the institution are its primary asset in an institution of higher education. We're not producing widgets here. And so in order to attract the very best so that when that dollar comes in, it's the highest level of instruction, it's the highest impact research, it's the best visioning behind the leadership, it's the best stewardship of that vision into a tangible execution that yields quality institution. That's how you benefit the state. And there is a marketplace for those people, and you measure those opportunities against that marketplace so that that investment dollar, if you want to think of it that way, is most likely to be maximized.
Regent Anderson?
Thank you, Chair McMillan. So I won't take much time here, and I don't even know if I have a question anymore because I had written some down, and
I got all kinds of answers. Let's go.
They've all been answered, but I'll make a couple comments, and if you want to comment on them, you're welcome to, but I think they've been answered. I was going to say, you're sitting here for an interview, or what might seem like an inquisition. To me, this has been a tremendous idea session. We have had a display of things we don't get to do with somebody who's an expert, regardless of what happens here in the education field. I was thinking about the achievement gap, and we talked about some things, and it brought me back to the Smith-Lever Act of 1914, about us extending our education to all as a land grant to everybody, which is where our extension offices came from. And Regent Swigham's, well, you're still here right now, but I think he'd agree that the extension offices don't work in the same way they did in 1914 with agriculture. It's different. Things are different. We have great resources in, I believe, all 87 counties of the state. What a great place to put them to work with summer camps and things for building the achievement gap, or extension offices for healthcare. So I'm getting some ideas, and I had a question about, we have 33% of the kids here come in with mental health issues, and how your job, if you're selected as president, is incredibly challenging and hard work and things like that. And I was going to ask you how you take care of yourself, but you've talked a little about that. And one of the things I find kind of uniquely Minnesotan to one of the things you said about commitments with work, family, and community. We have all had 12-hour days we have to fit into 8 hours. And you said, I figure it out. I find myself doing that all the time. I think my wife does that all the time. I think it's unique. And I will say something about your energy. I will say something about your energy, and you maybe know what I'm going to say. About 6:15 this morning, I was trying to pry my eyes open across the street, getting a cup of coffee, and I saw Provost Gable. And she appeared like she was going out for a run. I said, are you going out for a run? And you said, no, I just finished one.
It's a true story.
So I think you find the way, you figure it out. You take those 12-hour days and you get them into 8 hours. And like I say, you can comment if you want, but I think my questions have answered by what I've listened to. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, Provost Gable. First of all, let me say I've been involved in a lot of interviews as an interviewee or an interviewer, and but it's normally pretty much focused. I'm impressed that you're able to respond to all these questions coming from so many different directions.
Thank you.
I'm going to move back to education, if you will. The role of liberal arts. As you know, there's been a lot of discussion about that. Some colleges and universities have dropped some programs from it. The Chronicle had an article, I think, about a week ago dealing with the value of history as an education. I think it was about that. We had a discussion yesterday about liberal arts, and I had mentioned I'm a science is my field, but liberal arts were very critical to my education, I feel. I have people in my company, it's an animal health company, science-based, that have degrees in liberal arts. They have key positions. But yet these liberal arts are coming under a lot of a question. So I'd just like to hear what you feel about the role of liberal arts in education.
Well, it's one of my favorite subjects because I graduated with a philosophy degree and thought it was a tremendous way in which to begin my education. And for me, it was the exact way to start to be a lifelong learner. It's what I've looked back to time and time again as the cornerstone for how I've learned to do some very, very applied things, or why I had an appetite or margin for some of the things I've been asked to do that I didn't know how to do, but somehow was expected to figure out how to do anyway. And so I have a very owned bias in terms of the value of the liberal arts as a field of study. I also, though, for years was on the faculty of a very applied area and then ended up running a college in a professional school where what we saw in very anecdotal ways from individual recruiters and what eventually became some pretty interesting aggregate data from CEO surveys. And there's a study that Amazon recently did about their own team about how in the applied fields, and this was both technical and professional, there is no question that higher ed is serving the need in terms of technical skill, but that there is a new talent wish, if you will, for improvement in critical thinking, communication skills, ability to discern. There are others, but skills that we would surmise could come from other sources, but very clearly are nurtured and facilitated through a grounding in the liberal arts. And so we started to do cross-registration with arts and sciences, and we created a competency assessment beyond the skills assessment to try to make sure that students who are graduating with some very technical skills had the ability to also at least find a grounding in the type of mindset that comes from being exposed to liberal arts education. So I think the choice should be with the student. I think we should be paying attention to what they're choosing and making some decisions to modify and tweak. But I think that there's a lot of indication, both in these relationship-based indices, like what recruiters say to a dean, and articles that come out from CEO surveys that identify these types of skill gaps, and what we see in aggregate data, which is that liberal arts graduates sometimes have lower initial starting salaries, but that they catch up in a pretty short order. And that's census data. That's not data put out by the Association of Liberal Arts Educators or something, if there were such a thing, along those lines. And then we need to advocate, because I think we all, even if it wasn't our own area of study, appreciate the value of a robust and comprehensive portfolio of educational opportunities, and how could that not include the liberal arts?
Thank you. Regent Swigum, you had a hand up long ago, and I don't know if you're still interested.
Interested in the question, or interested in where is president, or what?
In asking a scintillating and challenging question of Provost Gable.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I'll try to be quick. By the way, I'm starting to believe you can walk on water.
Only if it's frozen.
I'm a firm believer that life is a lot about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of taking off of what Regent Rocha mentioned. One of our most critical relationships is with our legislature. There's headroom. There's room for improvement. Provost Gable, what type of, it's absolutely critical to our success.
Without question. Mm-hmm.
Probably true in South Carolina, too. Provost Gable, do you have any ideas, thoughts, strategies, or just anything that you might want to give us in relationship to how you might develop relationships with legislators, politicians? I hate to say that, but they are.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts you might give to us regarding this critical relationship to our success?
Well, first I'll express my complete agreement at how critical the relationship is, and then I'll just speak from experience because I had a really good fortune that in the earliest of my administrative work, when I was a department chair in the state of Florida, we had a line item budgeted center as part of the portfolio of that department that created the need for a legislative relationship probably earlier in my own personal experience than most higher education administrators would have it. And certainly over time in progressive leadership positions, it's deepened and broadened. And I think what my experience would tell me, and of course you would know better than I do, is that legislators are passionate about the constituencies that they serve, and they're passionate about the state as a whole. And that might mean very different things based on their who they represent and the needs of that area and their own personal passions. But one of the beauties of an institution like this is there are very few things that we could not find overlap on. And so the nature of the relationship is making sure, I think, that our elected officials understand all of the different ways that the university creates value. So if the need of a legislator is to really understand how the university drives economic development, then talking about a curricular innovation or a particular faculty member's research might be a pleasant conversation, but it's unlikely to create the kind of shared investment in the future and yield that really precious dollar that Regent Rocha mentioned earlier in support of the institution. And so how you find where you have common ground is in the relationship. So at the end of the day, that's time, conversation, a little homework, spending time together, making sure you know each other, being really up to date on what's going on campus, being up to date on what's going on around the state, and then having the conversations together so that you can see the fit, because there is one. We have to just talk about where it is. Thank you.
Regent Lucas.
Thank you. I have a question that's really been weighing on me, and it's about student mental health.
Yes.
And it's something that, we talk about. We don't really, I don't think, understand what it is in today's world that has made this such a phenomenon that the most popular course, I think, at either Harvard or Yale is called happiness. And I'm just wondering if you have any insights on that, because there's something in this world today that's very troubling to many of our students, and it'd be really important to get your insight on that.
Yes, the statistics are virtually overwhelming in how many of our students are suffering with mental health challenges. It is not only does it make you heartsick on their behalf, but it also requires real thought and purpose behind the resources that you make available for students, and that is in some ways relatively obvious in terms of counseling support and access to clinical care, but also in the awareness and sensitivity of the faculty and staff so that they can be allies to students when they are themselves not clinicians and not subject matter experts in how to provide support to a student who's experiencing a mental health challenge. And we've talked about that a couple of times over the course of the last week, and I've given sort of a list of things that the University of South Carolina has done to try to deepen and broaden the support for students when they arrive on campus. And then, apropos to a couple of the questions we've already discussed, I had a bit of a humbling moment when I was meeting with the students in the Twin Cities when one of our medical students said to me, well, that's all fine, we're treating it like a crisis, which it is, but what about the prevention beforehand? How is the university going to leverage governance and engagement to reach out with whomever they need to reach out to, share input and perspective with whomever we need to share perspective with, so that we become a part of, so that by the time they're taking the class, it's just because they want to think about happiness and not because they're desperately trying to find it in a way that is escaping them at that time. And, you pick your head up and you think, well, that's a little humbling and also amazing, right? That you would think of it that way, because we've been thinking of it in a crisis mindset. If it's happening right in front of you, you treat it in real time. And I'm obviously not a clinician, but I'm in the company of them on a regular basis, and I see what they're doing, and it's helpful. But we need to be a better part of getting at the prevention, and I don't know what that is yet, and there are great minds around the table trying to figure that out. But it is we should be part of that conversation, so that at this campus we could be a thought leader on driving that statistic down, meaning ensuring more and more health, body and mind, for our students.
Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on Regent Swigham's comment about legislative relations, just a tidbit of information. At the height of the legislature Minnesota's contribution to the university, I believe it was about 40% of our operating budget. Today it's 17 to 18%. So there lies a challenge of relationships and working with members of the legislature and a new governor to demonstrate the value of this university. Second of all, I know you have traveled to Crookston, Morris, Duluth, Rochester. I'd be interested to know your vision, your plans, your thoughts for enrollment, the enhancement of these very important campuses and their programs within the university system.
Mm-hmm. Well, each campus talked about enrollment management in different ways, not surprisingly, given they're in different locations and have some different signature missions and different ways of approaching enrollment management that are driven both locationally and in the leadership philosophy of the respective chancellors. There is no question that nationally a lot of institutions are struggling with enrollment. It hits different institutions in different ways. A lot of those institutions have done some very clever things. There are some very clever things here. And we also know, as a matter of demographics, that the overall high school population is declining. And so to the extent that that's the primary constituency that we would be bringing to campus, we should be very thoughtful about that everywhere and how it affects each institution individually. And so I think the role of the president in that sense is to, well, number one, support the chancellor who would have the best subject matter expertise about the unique opportunities and challenges on their campus, but then to think of how the unique attributes of the system might create better demand. And some of those things are operational within the system. We talked about sharing admissions lists and some of the ways in which that can work just within the system itself. But when you think about the student who might consider us who would not have, what is the role of the president in making that student aware of the opportunities here? Some of that is in supporting the vision of the chancellor. Some of it is in a PR conversation. Some of it is in probably creating some best practices within the system around recruiting materials, engagement with the high schools, thinking about different ways and where we might go that we haven't been before, whether it's other parts of the state, other communities within the state, other states, or even internationally.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, one follow-up.
Just follow-up. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Provost Gable, one thing that country preachers know is when folks are tired of listening to, not to you, but the conversation, in my opinion, has gone on now for 1 hour and 45 minutes.
Is that all?
That's all. And you have not taken a drink of water during that time.
No, I haven't.
Mr. Chairman, for one, I'm ready to move on, and I will vote at the appropriate time to name Joan Gable as the next president of the University of Minnesota upon the conditions that you and leadership work out a compensation package at the appropriate time. I'm not trying to get ahead of things, but I think we've been here, had great conversation, great exchange of ideas, and want to thank you, the search committee, for their work and your endurance with us this past week. So at least you have one vote. You just got to get
thank you.
6 more.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. I'll have more to say about process and what comes next after we conclude. My list is starting to shrink. I have Regent Hsu, Regent Powell, and Regent Beeson left on it. I'd like to make sure we get through those, and we are starting to approach the 2-hour mark right now, and we started a little later than we had wanted to, but I'm sensing the board is getting close here, but let me work through those 3 and see if there's anything left, and then I will have more to say about process, what's next. So Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Provost Gable. I'm glad to hear your thoughts on mental health. That's a serious issue, not just here, but everywhere, it seems. And I believe part of it is linked to tuition, student debt, and all those other problems that we all know about. And I'd like to know if you have any thoughts about student debt. You've been thinking about it for a while, I'm sure. One of our peers, for example, at Purdue, has started a thing called income sharing agreements. It's just kind of a contract between the school, that you're going to pay a share of your income when you graduate, and that great job. And I don't know exactly how that's gone. It's kind of been in, I think, in action for a couple of years now. But just wondering if you have any thoughts on that or any other ideas about student debt.
Yeah, I don't know how that one has gone either. I don't think they have quite enough, longitudinal data to really, although I do think it's it shows a lot of promise. I think it shows a lot of promise in the aggregate because we really need to be thinking about clever ways to make sure that students can afford education. And I think it's very clear that we are starting to inch up on what the market can bear, even for students who don't have fiscal constraints in any case. So the whole conversation around cost for education, whether a student is willing to pay it or needs help in order to pay it, they're starting to converge. And so it creates this greater conversation around pricing, access, different ways in which we would allow students to pay or encumber debt, and then how we would think about how they return that debt, whether it be through service or through going into underserved. There's all kinds of models. What has not emerged is a best practice. And so there is still a fair amount of uncertainty around it. And of course, exactly as you describe, everyone who's testing anything new, it's new. And so we don't have a lot of a feedback loop yet. And you hate to experiment in such a critical question, but I think we're going to have to. I see a lot of value in doing some consortia level work. As large as our student population is here, even across the system, there's probably some economy of scale that we would benefit from in exploring that question and testing some of the ways in which we might be a part of the solution and exhibit some thought leadership. I can think of different types of consortia, not only within the system, but maybe in other ways that we might partner with an institution. And I also think there is a really significant amount of education that needs to happen so that students take the absolute minimum amount of debt that they really need in order to fulfill their educational goals. And we're learning how to do that better and better over time. And that's critically important because there are many students who are already able to do this, but there are many students that overborrow relative to cost in order to, I'm not sure why actually. I mean, there are various theories on it, and they would vary according to the individual student in any case. But really good financial training as part of financial aid, I think, is a way to keep the debt in a way where it becomes more of a conversation around investment rather than burden, that it gives you access to an excellent education that also gives you an earning potential that makes that debt affordable and therefore worthwhile, rather than the kind of thing that would create not just a financial strain, but literally a mental health challenge, as you describe.
Thank you. And then on a little bit different note, student safety, I think, is a question that I'd like to hear about in terms of, on the other campuses you've been on. They're a little bit different in terms of the environment. We have an urban campus here. We have a lot of things happening on the fringes of campus, less so in the center of campus, but just if you could give us some ideas of how you think about student safety, as lots of students are expressing concerns now about things happening. So.
I think student safety is one of our most important obligations. It is also one of our biggest challenges because they are adults and they live in communities that go beyond the walls that we control, even in the different campuses, but certainly in a major metropolitan area. I think it is critically important to provide students a lot of information, and it should be part of an orientation process to make sure that they are aware of the value of good choices. That's what I say to my own children, is to make good choices. I also tell them nothing good happens after, and I insert a certain hour of the day, but I don't want to usurp anyone else's parental theory in that regard. But I also think it's important to have a very well-trained, very student-centric police force on campus, a very good partnership with law enforcement beyond the walls, and a very good partnership with the service industry in the areas in which students are likely to frequent off of campus, so that you have a shared appreciation for how safe students who are in a position to retain their ability to make good choices, are able to do so, aren't overly pressured in ways otherwise overly tempted otherwise. And I'm a very big fan of keeping students busy with things like intramural sports and student organizations and experiential learning and work study and undergraduate research and on, so that they are doing those sorts of things with as much of their day as possible, and they go to bed happy and tired. Great. As I will tonight.
All right, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Provost, you hear a lot of references about rural and agriculture from my colleagues who are elected out of those districts, and I appreciate that. But the fact is the most intractable problems we have in the community are in my district, St. Paul, Regent Lucas's district, Minneapolis. There's a lot of wealth, but there's extreme poverty. And the achievement gap and all that comes with that. And President Brunick, both Brunick and Kaler committed their time and put their shoulder into early childhood education. So the conversation about where should a university president, is it United Way? That's great. There's unending volunteer activities, but my view is that a university president has got to be front and center around that issue, and we've got it right here.
I totally agree. I should probably clarify that that's what my husband does for a living. And so to some degree, I get the Gable family commitment to that issue by virtue of his work. And it is both his profession, his hobby, his passion. It's what he's been doing really for the bulk of his adult life, both during the day in work hours, and then after hours he tutors and is a member of a couple of boards for agencies that are committed to that exact question. And so as we divide our civic engagement and philanthropy, that's how we've done it, but it's because as a family we 100% agree with you.
I've, in one of our conversations, you used the term, we weren't necessarily built as academia to reach down, but we're getting better at it and finding ways to do it. And I've sensed, really appreciate Regent Beeson's comment and in your response. And I think it seems like an area you're not gonna, it won't be an abstraction to you. So no. It has to be much more. I'm gonna go to our vice chair unless I see another hand and give him the opportunity for a closing question or whatever you may have to share with us, Regent Powell, and then I'm going to wind us down.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I had a question, but Regent Lucas asked that question.
Steal it?
Way better than I could have or would have, and it had to do with mental health, which I do think is, and we listened to the chair of our faculty consultative committee here several months ago sat in that chair and basically said, we've never had a student population better prepared or more motivated, and nor have we ever had a group of students more under stress.
They are so.
And so I think I'll just say I appreciated your answer. I think that prevention is still sort of the undiscovered country here. It's really where we have to do the work, and so I don't have another question, Chair McMillan.
All right. Then I did say I would talk a little bit more about process, and before we adjourn, I'll note that I intend and have instructed Mr. Steves to notice a special meeting of the board on Tuesday, December 18th at 10 a.m. to consider action in accordance with our original schedule on Provost Gable's candidacy for the next president of this university. I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone. This meeting of the university's Board of Regents is adjourned.
I've got this one. You can have it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.